They lived in a beautiful neighborhood of Brentwood, California, and sadly, as first responders reached the scene, it became clear how fragile those final moments truly were. I was the one Rob chose to confide in during his last days, and I didn't fully understand how desperate he truly was. Those words were spoken by Billy Crystal, echoing through the quiet funeral of Rob Reiner inside a small chapel in Brentwood. There were no cameras and no prepared speeches, only white flowers, flickering candlelight, and the people who had truly stepped into his life. In a moment that seemed destined for silence, Billy Crystal's confession froze the entire room. He revealed that Rob's final conversations were not centered on himself. They revolved around his son, a long-standing obsession, a fractured relationship, and the helplessness of a father who had navigated an entire lifetime in Hollywood, yet could not find a way out within his own family. In that moment, it became clear this was not a farewell, but a belated admission of pain carried in silence, of warning signs that were overlooked, and of a friendship forced to live on with a regret that would never fade. The man who had spent his entire life making others smile now stood face to face with his own grief. Billy raised the microphone closer, drew in a slow breath, and finally spoke. He said he hated having to do this because if he was standing there, it meant Rob was really gone. Billy Crystal spoke very softly, without straining his voice or trying to provoke emotion. Yet the moment he began, the room fell utterly still. No one moved, no one coughed or whispered. Everyone sat as if they all understood they were hearing something that must not be missed. Billy paused briefly, looked down at the floor, then lifted his gaze as if searching for something to steady himself in the overwhelming quiet. According to Billy, Rob Reiner had never been a loud person. He didn't enter a room to command attention. He was simply present enough to make others feel safe and quiet enough to never make anyone feel pressured. Billy said that if you ever needed Rob, you wouldn't have to look for him. You just had to know. Rob had small habits that rarely changed. He called at exactly the right time, never early and never late. If an appointment was at 8, the phone rang precisely then. After every show, every public appearance, Rob would send a short message, just a few words, no explanation needed, enough to let Billy know he had watched and that he was still there. Before anything related to work, Rob always asked one question. Are you okay? Billy lowered his head when he mentioned this, explaining it was never a polite routine question. Rob genuinely waited for the answer. If Billy stayed silent, Rob would not continue. If Billy said he wasn't okay, Rob would not rush to offer advice. Billy said that throughout his life there had been no shortage of people who wanted to pull him out of sadness, urging him to be stronger and to move forward, but Rob was different. Rob never tried to erase that sadness. He stayed, sat beside him long enough for Billy to breathe again in his own way. After that sentence, the room sank into a heavy silence. No one reacted, because everyone understood this was no longer a speech, but something spoken from a very deep and private place. Billy turned slightly toward where the family sat, his voice slowing and softening. According to him, Rob had never stood alone. Behind him, there was always his family, always Michelle, the place Rob returned to after long days, where laughter no longer needed to be loud. Billy left it at one sentence, brief and complete. If Rob was the laughter the world heard, then Michelle was the place where that laughter came to rest. Billy bowed his head gently toward the family, then turned back to the room. His voice dropped noticeably as he admitted there were no more stories left. Only the one thing he had tried to avoid from the beginning. He still had one message from Rob, a short message he thought he would reply to later. He still had an appointment with Rob, nothing important, just a meal they said they would have next week. There was also one simple sentence he had intended to say, but kept postponing. Billy lifted his head, staring into the empty space ahead as if Rob were standing there listening. He said he thought they still had time, and then softly admitted that he let later steal the last time. He closed his eyes for a few seconds to keep his voice from breaking. The room remained silent, not because anyone signaled it, but because no one knew what else to do. In that moment, Billy's pain filled the room without a single word being spoken. Billy remained standing, weighing whether what he was about to say should be said at all. When he opened his eyes, his voice was lower and slower. He explained that Rob had told him something not meant for anyone else, but something he felt needed to be said so people could understand what kind of person Rob was. Rob was never one to complain. He hated burdening others with private matters and chose silence whenever he could endure it. But there were late nights when Rob would call Billy and say nothing at first, leaving long stretches of silence on the line. Then Rob began asking questions unrelated to movies or work, questions about being a father, about watching your child change and not knowing how to keep them close. Once, Rob asked directly what a father is supposed to do when he feels his child slipping out of reach. According to Billy, that was when Rob was talking about his son, Nick Reiner. For many years, Nick had struggled with addiction, a battle the family tried to fight again and again. He had been in rehabilitation 17 times, yet none could truly be called a success. To Rob, the number no longer mattered. What mattered was that he never allowed himself to believe it would truly be the last time. Billy said Rob had seen too many almost moments, almost peace and almost stability, and that the most painful part was not relapse, but the helplessness of a father who could not suffer in place of his child. Rob constantly questioned what he might have missed or not done enough, not with blame, but with fear of making one wrong choice that could push his son further away. Rob's question was never about control, but about how to make his son know he would never have to fight alone. When Rob spoke of Nick, there was no anger, only fear, not of public opinion or failure, but of doing something that could never be undone. Rob admitted there were days when Nick was doing well, sober and clear enough to make him believe everything would be all right, and other days when he didn't know where his son was in his own thoughts. What exhausted Rob most was helplessness, worrying about nights when he didn't know if his son would make it home safely, or calls that could come at any moment. He also spoke about money and inheritance, not out of greed or distrust, but fear that leaving everything too soon might push his son deeper into struggle. Thinking about it will kept him awake, not because he didn't want to leave anything behind, but because he didn't know how to do it the right way. Rob once told Billy that he loved his son, but feared that what he left behind could make him fall faster. Billy later admitted he couldn't stop wondering whether pressure, expectations, and addiction might have pushed Nick to lose control to a terrifying extent. Only once did Rob voice a fear Billy would never forget.